When I was intoxicated, I told him that I no longer found him attractive. The incident occurred as soon as I woke up. I wouldn't ponder for more than a second if I could go back in time. And hit myself. Hi everyone, this is Emily, my spouse's. Luke, a 35-year-old man, and I am a 30-year-old woman. 3 years have passed since we started dating. Perhaps the only thing I can do is, let me tell you up front, that this is not one of those films where everything starts to go smoothly, as though there was a bright side to everything. It is shameful, horrible, and completely my fault. First of all, I love my husband. Or at least I believed I did. One of the nicest, most diligent men I've ever encountered is Luke. Despite his lack of flamboyance, he is a reliable individual who has his own little firm. The kind of person who stays up late helping you with things you didn't even know you needed help with, and who remembers your favorite coffee order without you having to ask. I'm not here to boast about him, though. In fact, I'm here because I was able to destroy all we owned, everything. Everything began last Friday. My night out, which I regarded as a girls' night out, took place in the evening after work. Wine, beer, spirits, and pretty much anything else were available by the time I came home. I must admit that I was a little tipsy. I was high from drinking. And I don't know, from insecurity and resentment. Who knows what's going through your mind? I arrived home in 5 minutes to find Luke waiting for me, ensure my safe return. He had stayed up late. What did I do, too? I'm not even attracted to you anymore, I muttered, looking him square in the eyes instead of thanking him. Yep, I know what sort of person says that to their husband. The worst thing. In the first place, I was unaware that I had spoken it. I felt like my brain was about to explode when I woke up that morning with fuzzy eyesight and hazy thinking, as if his heart had been torn from his chest. Luke was perched on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet. Is this what you really think of me? Was his first question to me. At that point, everything collapsed. About 4 years ago, Luke and I met at this small downtown cafe where he was a manager. I can still clearly recall my initial encounter with him. He had a worn-out smile that indicated to me he had had a tough day. And he was standing behind the bar wearing this simple button-up shirt. It was nothing like love at first sight. And I wouldn't describe it as such. He was definitely not my type. He was kind of cute, but not in the tall, athletic, endearing way that normally drew my eye. Luke was unusual. He was calm, trustworthy, and, to be honest, a little bit normal. At first, I didn't give him any attention. One day I went in during lunch and we spoke a few words. He noticed that I had forgotten the napkins, so instead of giving them to me, he made a small joke about how I'm either saving the world or something. I laughed at least, even if it wasn't funny or anything. I guess that's where it all started. Or started, of course. I had just gotten out of a terrible breakup with this man who, in retrospect, was all looks and no substance, so I wasn't really seeking a relationship at the moment. I suppose Luke fits the criteria because my friends used to make fun of me for having poor judgment in men. One of them even said, Emily, maybe it's time to stop going for the flashy guys and find someone who actually treats you right. He had a knack for giving you a sense of security without being ostentatious or overconfident. After a few weeks, he once asked me out, and we continued to go to the cafe periodically to get coffee. True enough, I remember even pausing to consider my response. I was tired of constantly looking for men who were fascinated with me but didn't care about me as a person, and Luke cared. Yes, even though I wasn't sure if I was sexually attracted to him or not, I asked myself, why not? It was obvious. He proposed right away, and we dated for around a year and a half. There weren't any elaborate dinners or romantic gestures. My best friend, I can't imagine life without you. Will you marry me? He asked me one day while we were at our favorite park. It wasn't the typical movie proposal, but it seemed right, so I accepted. Everything about our first year of marriage was good, even fantastic. I felt that Luke had every quality I was looking for in a partner despite his tight work schedule. He was a great buddy who was always willing to make time for me, never in my life had I felt so loved. However, the slip started at some point throughout this procedure. I'm not sure when it started, but tiny cracks started to appear. It was more subtle than that. It wasn't like we were always fighting or something. He never looked interested in exercising, and his clothing didn't fit perfectly. Among other things I hadn't noticed previously. A part of me questioned whether I had settled too soon, but I convinced myself it didn't matter. I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but in retrospect, I began to see Luke in a different light. It wasn't like he did something wrong that I would find objectionable or that he suddenly changed into someone else entirely. He was still the same kind man I married, but I changed in some way. Who have you seen? How much weight did I bench press today? Or Evan took me to the weekend getaway. Without asking, check how healthy he is in this photograph. Were some of the questions I asked my friends at our many brunches. Then they turned to face me, and I would get that sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Please understand that Luke was wonderful in many respects, but at those times, all I could think about was how we didn't match the idealized version of myself that I desired. After seeing couples grinning at the gym or on far-flung trips on Instagram, Luke wasn't photogenic in the photos I had of him. His clothes never seemed to fit properly, and he constantly appeared stiff. It wasn't fair, but rather than valuing him, I began to wish he looked different, taller, fitter, more something. I started looking for trivial, unimportant topics to argue about. I thought I was smart. For instance, if he wore a shirt that was too tight on his belly, I would say, maybe that shirt is too tight, sweetheart. Or if he returned for more at the table, I would laugh and say, well, you are certainly making up for it tonight. I now realize that those insignificant comments most likely caused him more pain than I realized. Of course, Luke was not unaware of the shift. Is everything okay with us? Or you've been kind of quiet lately. He would ask me these questions, and I would always dismiss them with an I'm just tired or work's been stressful. The reality is, though, I didn't know how to describe my feelings since they didn't make sense to me. Even though I believed I loved Luke, I was creating an imaginary version of him in my mind. I became increasingly frustrated each time he failed to meet that fictitious level. It began to snowball. I started to pay close attention to every action he made, as though I had grown suspicious of him. Why doesn't this man exercise? I would ask myself if he sat on the couch for too long. If he talked about his work, I would quickly become disinterested. Because it was too boring and dull for TV, I see now that it was absurd. But I was powerless to stop myself at the time. I was making comparisons between him and imaginary men that I had most likely never met in person. The fact that my buddies weren't afraid to voice their ideas didn't help either. Emily, you're gorgeous. You could have ended up with anyone. And you chose Luke. Not to be rude, but don't you ever think you settled? My friend Jenna once said to me over brunch. I laughed it off, but her statement lingered with me. Have I made a deal? Was I making too much effort to persuade myself that Luke was sufficient? Even if Luke wasn't flawless, he didn't merit the treatment I gave him without really choosing to. I started to distance myself from you. If Luke ever tried to arrange a date night, I would come up with excuses like I am tired or perhaps next week. No, it wasn't the physical distance that started to matter. I started emotionally separating myself. I would spend time with friends or simply pass the time on social media, admiring photos of contented couples and thinking, we clearly aren't that. I froze when he asked me directly one night, do you still love me? The words became stuck in my throat when I tried to say yes. He didn't press, but I could tell by the expression on his face that he wasn't convinced. So I answered something ambiguous like, of course I do. Why would you even ask that? Luke never pushed. That was his specialty. Instead of valuing his composure, patience, and understanding, I began to perceive it as weakness. He didn't stand up for me. Even though I wanted him to, he simply walked away. In my deranged mind, I also blamed him for letting me draw away. How I came up with such feelings is a mystery to me. Maybe I was trying to destroy the best thing I had ever had because I secretly felt I didn't deserve it. Maybe I was self-actualizing him. All I know is that Luke found it harder to let me go the more I made an effort to keep us out of each other's lives. I wanted to get away more and more the longer he held on. That was just another girls' night, and it began like any other. To catch up and relax after a demanding week, my friends and I had decided to get together at a bar downtown. The plan was to have a few drinks, maybe some laughter, and then head home by midnight. One drink, however, quickly escalated to 3, then 4, and before I knew it, I had entirely forgotten how much I had consumed. The conversations were flowing, the music was loud, and to be honest, my only thought was how good it felt to be worry-free for once. When I returned home that night at midnight, I had no idea that I was a total mess. I was barely able to stand, much less think well. I entered drunkenly, as Luke often did, and found him still awake. He is a really dependable person, so he had to wait. I arrived home safely. I did the unimaginable rather than simply thanking him or politely answering him. Although I can't recall the specifics, I do recall that I was slurring my words and that my feelings were erupting in a manner that only occurs after consuming excessive amounts of alcohol. I once looked at him and exclaimed, "You're not even attractive to me anymore." Without any background information or justification, I said those harsh, scathing words. I only remember morning with a horrible headache. I didn't see anything incorrect. At first, I assumed it was simply another hangover, another day of the week, or another day that had come to an end. But as I went into the kitchen to find out Luke's actual attitude, my physical strength became acute and completely unexpected. He wasn't in the nice mood that was expected of him. He didn't make coffee or say good morning. I wondered if we had never met or if we had and he could end the connection. Because he was just sitting there, icy and silent. His words were clipped and brief, and he hardly spoke to me at all. He simply stared at me as if I were a stranger. When I asked him if something was wrong, the realization that something had occurred, something negative, began to set in. He couldn't repeat what I was saying until the end of the day, when I plucked up the guts to ask him directly. "Luke isn't like that. He didn't scream or lose his temper. Do you really think that about me? What do you have to tell me that you are not interested in?" I felt like the AI, and all he could do was look at me with those horrified eyes as though I had just smacked him. The room had been sucked from me. My initial reaction was to tell him that even though I couldn't recall saying it, the fact that I had said it, intoxicated or not, implied that it must have been true. Luke didn't believe me when I attempted to explain myself and dismissed it as the alcohol talking. I couldn't really blame him. I froze the day Luke asked me if I truly meant that I didn't find him sexually attractive. He simply sat there in shock, and I was at a loss for words, wondering how I could make up for the terrible thing I had just said. I muttered an apology after what felt like an eternity, explaining that I didn't mean it and that it was just the alcohol talking. However, as I was saying that, I became aware of how weak it truly was. It was nearly made worse by Luke's refusal to argue or yell. He simply gave me a small nod as if he was taking in what I had said and said, "I need some time to think." He then left, leaving me standing in the kitchen with a pit in my stomach. Even though Luke was obviously hurt, he remained composed and calm. On the contrary, it made me feel worse rather than better. To use the most accurate description, the next few days were strange. Luke didn't bring it up again at this point, but things had changed as though it were the most natural thing in the world. He was simply interrupting me and erecting a wall between us. He started going to work early and coming home late overnight because he had a lot of work to do at home. He only talked to me about things that were absolutely necessary. I no longer treasured the small things like him asking how my day went, or even sharing a trivial item he had noticed at work. He physically present but emotionally absent. He stopped smiling at my jokes and inquiring about my day. He wasn't nasty or unpleasant, but his silence was deafening. Every glance felt colder, every reaction more distant. It's hard to explain, but it was like living with the ghost of the person I'd married. The guilt began to sink in each time I would look at him, and it began consuming me little by little. It had been more than what I had said and done that night alone. It was about everything: the way I'd let animosity build up, the tiny insults at his appearance, and the emotional distance I'd constructed long before happened. And now I was paying for it. I tried to solve things. I cooked his favorite foods. I'd place little notes in his lunch bag, as I used to do when we first got married. One night, I even tried to initiate intimacy, hoping it would overcome the distance between us. But every time, he just gave me this sad, tired face, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Then he'd respond, "I'm not in the mood," or maybe. Another time, it stung, but I couldn't blame him. I'd begun this disaster. That stress was not overlooked by anyone nearby, especially those watching from behind the scenes. Actually, my pal saw it nearly right away, or at least the more perceptive ones did. At one of the brunches, I remember Jenna turning to me and asking, "Is everything all right between you and Luke? You seem off." I told her it was just a phase, and she just asked if we were ending things. But her expression didn't seem to believe it, if that's the right way to put it. I finally informed her about it a few days later, feeling frustrated. The night I got drunk, what I said, and what happened after that night were all revealed to her. Jenna didn't mince words. She remarked, "Emily, you should have been more careful," in a low voice to avoid being overheard by the other females. I nodded, but her statement only made me feel more anxious. You know Luke's sensitive. Guy stuff like that, especially coming from you, sticks with him. You need to fix before it's too late. I was aware that she was correct. But how can you make amends when the other person has already begun to distance themselves? The worst part was the stillness. He didn't yell at me. He didn't dispute, and he didn't say anything that could be interpreted as an accusation against me, in a sense. It hurt more that he simply existed than if he had burst. There seems to have been a tacit understanding between us that I was not worth his time. I was devastated by that knowledge. I began to second-guess everything I did. I would look at him to see whether he was irritated if I laughed at a TV show we were watching. I would question whether I had pushed too far if I asked him about his day and he just gave me a one-word response. I was always trying to convince him and perhaps myself that I was still the person he fell in love with. And it seemed like I was treading carefully in my own house. I made an effort to restart the conversation one evening in the hopes that we could finally get things straightened up. "Luke," I said, but he interrupted me before I could say anything more. His tone was firm but not harsh. "Emily, I've heard your apologies. I just need time, okay?" I dropped it after nodding, but on the inside, I felt like I was losing him more and more every day, though I secretly doubted it. I continued telling myself that I just needed to have patience, and that he would change his mind eventually. Between us, something had changed, and I wasn't sure if it would ever return to its previous state. On a Friday night, I simply could. Throughout the week, Luke had seldom talked to me, and when he did, it seemed like every word required effort. The house was oppressive. I was aware that I was to blame for everything, but I was at a loss for solutions. I made the decision to go out rather than stay home and deal with the mess I had made. I secretly knew I was fleeing, but I convinced myself I only needed a night to clear my thoughts. Jenna made arrangements with her husband, so I texted her to meet up at the bar. You mean figures, except for me, everyone seemed to be in control. I went by myself, telling myself it wouldn't be a huge issue, that I would just have a drink or two and go home. The loneliness struck me hard. I felt so little in comparison to the groups of friends clinking glasses and the couples laughing. In an attempt to block off the guilt that kept bothering me, I ordered one drink and then another. At whatever point he appeared, he had this smile that makes you feel like you're the only one in the room, and I didn't see him at first until he slid onto the bar stool next to me and remarked, "You look like you've had a long day." Although he wasn't particularly attractive, he exuded confidence. I couldn't resist grinning in return. It was for us to start conversing. He told me I had the most beautiful grin he had seen all night, laughed at my dumb jokes, and inquired about my job. It stood in such sharp contrast to the icy quiet I had been experiencing it at home. I felt seen for the first time in weeks, even though I knew I shouldn't have been entertaining it. The distinction between casual talk and something more started to become hazy as the evening wore on and the drinks continued to flow. He was pleasant in a way that made me feel wanted, but he was neither forceful nor aggressive. He leaned closer at one point and said, "Do you want to step outside? It's getting loud in here." I was hesitant at first, but I nodded. We were simply going to talk outside, so I assured myself it wouldn't hurt anything. The refreshing night air served as a wake-up call, but it wasn't sufficient to prevent the subsequent events. He mentioned something about how he couldn't believe someone like me was out by themselves. As we stood by his car laughing and chatting, I have no idea what happened to me, but before I knew it, he and I were leaning in and we shared a kiss. It wasn't a passionate, cinematic kiss. Rather, it was awkward and the result of a combination of poor judgment and intoxication. However, at that precise time, I felt as though I had been longing for attention, approval, and a respite from the burden of my guilt. I didn't stop even though it seemed wrong. The magic was broken by the sound of an automobile approaching. Nervously chuckling, I withdrew and looked to see who it was, and Luke was there. He was merely observing us from the comfort of his automobile. My heart fell. He sat there with this expression on his face, disappointed, almost disgusted without getting out. shouting, or doing anything dramatic. He looked at me as if I were someone he didn't even know. And I'll never forget it. The man with whom I had been conversing saw my response and followed my eyes. He looked from me to Luke and said, "Do you know him?" His face fell when I stumbled. "That's my husband. I didn't know you were married. I wouldn't have," he muttered, taking a step back, but I was too busy staring at Luke to pay attention. Panicked, I began to walk toward his car. I yelled, "Luke, wait," but he remained silent. I stood there like a fool in the middle of the parking lot while he simply pulled up the window and drove away. I dismissed the bartender's repeated attempts at apology. "Just go," I murmured. Struggling to keep my composure, he swiftly vanished back into the bar without arguing. I was by myself. My mind was racing with all the ways I had messed up, and my heart was pounding. I was shocked by what I had just done. I tried contacting Luke in my car, but he didn't pick up. I must have called him 5 or 6 times, but by the time I arrived home, his car wasn't in the driveway, the house was dark, and his keys were gone. That's when it hit me. I might have just lost the last amount of trust he had in me, and this time I didn't think I could mend it. I felt like I had been struck by a vehicle when I woke up the following morning. My stomach was in knots, my head was pounding, and I kept thinking about what had happened the previous evening. After everything that transpired, I hardly slept at all. I kept expecting Luke to come home so we could speak it out and perhaps he would calm down. However, he never did. He was seated at the table with his arms folded when I entered the kitchen. His face was too composed, but it appeared as though he had not slept either. When Luke was angry, he simply became quiet instead of exploding or yelling. And if I've learned anything, it's that quiet may be far worse. His calm voice seemed like a hit to the gut. But before I could say anything, he looked up at me and continued, "We need to talk," with my hands shaking. I sat down across from him and searched for the appropriate words. But he began before I could say anything. "You made it clear last night that you don't respect me or our marriage," he stated, in a cool, collected voice. "You've been pulling away for months, Emily. I've been trying to ignore it, hoping we could work through it, but what I saw last night," he stopped and tightened his jaw. That was the final straw. My throat constricted, my voice broke, and I could feel the tears beginning to fall. "Luke, it wasn't what it looked like. I swear I didn't mean for any of that to happen. I was just," holding up his hand, he interrupted me. "I'm so sorry," I wept. The weight of everything weighing on me. "Don't make excuses. You kissed another man. You chose to do that, Emily, and even if you didn't mean for it to happen, it did. And I can't come back from that. I messed up. I know I did, but I love you, Luke. Please just let me make it right." I watched his eyes sparkle for the first time as he shook his head, but he refrained from crying. He could not have screamed at me more forcefully than when he said, "I gave you everything I had, and it still wasn't enough. I don't even know who you are anymore. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, but it won't be with me." I wanted to protest and beg him, but I could see by the look on his face that he was finished. Was definitive, not merely hurt or rage. He got up and moved in the direction of the door. He stated, "I'll pack my things and move out by the end of the week," in a calm but aloof tone. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the separation." I pleaded, "Luke, please," and followed him to the door. He gave me a final glance and said, "Don't do this. I'll do anything to fix it. Just tell me what to do. Emily, you can't make better. I'm not staying to pick up the pieces because you broke it." Then he disappeared. I had some of my worst days ever in the days that followed. As promised, by the end of the week, Luke had packed his belongings and moved out. He only asked for his clothes and a few personal belongings. He didn't fight or quarrel. Without him, the house felt empty, and I cried most of the time while mentally going over all of my mistakes. It felt like the last nail in the coffin when his lawyer inquired about the split. Simply put, Luke was severing links rather than prolonging the conflict or allowing for reconciliation. I couldn't really comprehend what was happening, so I signed the papers in a stupor after he moved out. I made several attempts to contact him in the hopes that he would at least agree to speak, but each text message went ignored and every phone call went straight to voicemail. He seemed to no longer want to be associated with me, as if I had turned into a stranger. To be honest, I couldn't hold him responsible. I had disregarded him, our union, and all that we had created. All I did was drive him farther away, despite my belief that I was attempting to mend our relationship. And here I was by myself, looking at the remains of a life that I had ruined myself. Update: Luke left my life a little more than 6 months ago, and to be honest, I still think about how badly I messed up every single day. I've heard that he's doing better than ever now, that he's moved on, in addition to being incredibly beautiful. The new person he seems to truly make him happy. Once, I accidentally ran into them at the grocery store and got a glimpse of her. He appeared liberated, as if a burden had been removed from his shoulders. And she was smiling at something he said. I've heard that she treats him like a king. And he's doing well, starting a new company. I'm wondering how I let it all go when I'm in this studio apartment, to be honest. The place is small and dreary. Even my parents, who assisted me in moving and following the divorce, appeared more disappointed than encouraging. It hurt, but my mother wasn't incorrect when she said, "Emily, you had everything most women dream of, and you threw it away. I don't even know who you are anymore. I've had plenty of time to reflect on my mistakes. It's not just that I cheated or said nasty things. It's also that I let my fears stand in the way of anything genuine. I totally ignored what I had a secure, loving relationship with someone who genuinely cared about me because I was so preoccupied with what other people thought and with desiring a life that appeared ideal on the outside. I am now the subject of whispers. My pals have also turned away from me. Jenna claimed that because I'm a negative influence, her spouse didn't want her to spend time with me again. I can't blame him, but that hurt more than I anticipated. I don't know if I'll become the cautionary story, the one that people point to and say, "Don't end up like her." I'm making an effort to move on, but I will never be able to forgive myself for what I did. I sincerely hope that my experience is heard and that someone takes something away from it. Don't take it for granted if you have someone who accepts you for who you are. You may not have another chance. I realize now that I've lost Luke forever. Sincerely, I've come to terms with the fact that there is no way to change or return to the way things were. I had something in uncommon, a man who loved me without conditions. But I let it elude me due to my own superficial concerns and insecurities. I would go back and change everything if I could, but that's not how life operates, is it? I've given everything a great deal of thought. I initially wanted to point the finger at Luke's lack of change, the situation, or even the pressure from friends. In actuality, though, I am solely responsible for my own actions. Instead of recognizing that he was everything I could have ever wanted, I let my own conceit and self-doubt sour our connection. Although I cannot alter the past, I can accept it. Anyone out there who might be in my shoes can hopefully learn something from my story. Don't let your insecurities destroy a relationship with someone who loves you for who you are. You might not get another chance, believe me. Pursuing an idealized notion of perfection is the fastest way to lose anything genuine. And the grass isn't greener on the other side. I'm sorry, Luke, if you ever hear this. I had to say it even though I know it won't make everything better. I hope you've realized that you deserved better than what I offered you. I hope she gives you the respect I deserve. I also want to thank everyone who has stayed to hear my story. I probably deserve whatever you have to say, so please be in the comments or don't. Is just truth. It's not one of those stories where the narrator is redeemed or has a good ending. I'm learning to live with reality. Even though it can be messy and painful at times, that's all I have to say. Don't forget to take care of the individuals you care about. For now, goodbye.